You mean I can't use the word if I'm reporting?
You can do anything you want, Barbara. You're Barbara Walters. I'm just saying
I'm sorry, that has nothing to do with it, Sherry.
From the subject at hand. This is an issue that will go on until we die.
It is the subject at hand.
I'm saying when you say the word, I don't like it. I don't like it when you say it brings up feelings. Yes, when white people say it brings up feelings in me.
That was Barbara Walters and Sherry Shepard on The View today discussing the name of a West Texas hunting camp once leased by Republican presidential candidate Rick Perry and his father. Yesterday, the Washington Post revealed that the hunting camp was, quote, a place known by the name painted in block letters across a large, flat rock standing upright at its gated entrance. Now, because of our standards and practices department here at NBC, we are not allowed to actually speak that word. I wouldn't want to speak that word. We're not even allowed to show it to you in print in its entirety, although it does appear in print in its entirety in the Washington Post on Sunday and in the New York Times today. It's very easy to find this word out there. The revelation has rocked the presidential campaign. Here's Republican presidential candidate Herman Cain on Fox News Sunday.
That isn't a more vile, negative word than the N word, and for him to leave it there as long as he did before I hear that they finally painted over it, it's just plain insensitive to a lot of black people in this country.
Perry's campaign immediately replied with this. Mr. Cain is wrong about the Perry family's quick action to eliminate the word on the rock, but is right. The word written by others long ago is insensitive and offensive. That is why the Perrys took quick action to cover and obscure it. That turned out to be good enough for Herman Cain.
Let's talk about what's important to the American people. I would rather talk about that and take questions on that than to continue to beat this distraction to death about a word that appeared on a rock. I really don't care about that word. They painted over it in the story. I think it happened. I accept Governor Perry's response on that.
No other Republican candidate found anything to be bothered by in what we've found out about Rick Perry this weekend.
In this day and age, to try to turn something around and make him say that he endorsed using that word, I think we should worry about the wars and assassinations, the economy, not trying to find out some way that you're going to blame Perry.
I don't believe Rick Perry's a racist. I think it's a side issue. It's unfortunate, and he's being hit with that.
The White House today wisely decided to let bad enough alone.
The name is clearly offensive, and from what I've read, and I have no inside knowledge beyond what I've read, the governor shares that opinion.
If his opponents don't want to touch this controversial matter, it may prove to be detrimental for the Texas governor trying to take his Texas approach to the national stage. Joining me now is James Moore. He's been reporting on Texas politics and history since 1975 and is author of the forthcoming book on Rick Perry entitled, this is interesting because NBC Standards lets me say this, and I still don't want to. Adios, fill in the blank, everyone can read it, Why Rick Perry Will Make America Miss George W. Bush. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, Jim.
Sure.
I leave the title up there long enough for everyone to read it every time.
Okay.
I found this, the Herman Cain reaction was fascinating to me because he reacted to the story as we knew it in the Washington Post on television yesterday, saying that this is absolutely wrong. And by the way, all of the information from the Perry family about when they say they painted over that sign was in the Washington Post story. No new information emerged to make Herman Cain suddenly find the whole thing to be okay. Is that because Herman Cain is calculating that within Republican politics, you don't want to complain about anybody's racist associations or past in any way?
There's probably an argument to be made, Lawrence, that this story, for him to keep complaining about it, is is an unsettling reminder to his party, and it eventually could augur against Herman Cain. I think for Perry's part, however, this has just been completely bungled by his staff. His media people are clearly very inept and largely incompetent. They tended to, in response, try to parse how they reacted to this. First we knew about it on this date, and then he knew about it on this date, and then he used the eastern entrance to the ranch. It was very sort of awkward for them to take that approach when they should have owned it. They should have said, look, the governor knew this. When they started leasing the land, they painted it, they kept painting it, they kept it covered up, and that would have been the end of this thing, but they bungled it pretty badly. And it's, you know, it's another brick in the little red wagon that Rick Perry is having to pull around.
But in the reporting we have now in the Washington Post and in the New York Times, there's a real dispute as to exactly when that thing was covered up. You have witnesses in both articles saying they saw it relatively recently, as recently as, 6 years ago, that it was not immediately covered over in the 1980s when the Perrys first took over that property at all. And those witnesses, as they sit in the article, are, at least as credible as the Perry allies who say, oh, I never saw it.
Well, here's an interesting thing. Rick has said many times that when he was a young guy back in the 70s, he would get in his pickup truck and go down to the Clear Fork on the Brazos River and take his tent and his rifle, and he would camp. He knew the name of that place. That's a name that's been around forever. It wasn't added to that property at that particular time. So he's particularly insensitive and certainly guilty of bad form for bringing his fellow legislators out to that site in the future when he took them out there camping and hunting on visits. So if it were on that property, in fact, it was a bad mistake on his part. As to when it was covered up, it's going to be very difficult to get something definitive on that. But I will say this, when you lease property, hunting property in Texas, and you want to make a change to that property, the property owner is the one who's going to have the final say on that. Rick may have wanted to, but couldn't. Who knows? But if he couldn't, then he probably shouldn't have been there. It's just bad judgment on his part.
Jim, quickly before you go, rate for me exactly how shocked you were when you discovered this about the Perry property.
Well, I want to say that Rick Perry's not a racist. This guy's appointed more African Americans in this state of any governor in our history, the first Chief Justice African American in the state Supreme Court of Texas. But it doesn't surprise me because they're clunky, and they clearly did not vet their own candidate effectively, Lawrence. They should have done their own research and find out what stories there were out there that could have been harmful. And then they have all this issue of history in West Texas of not that many African Americans that Rick grew up around, a largely white population, and he brings that with him in his candidacy.
Jim Moore, thank you very much for your Texas expertise. We're going to need you. Thanks for joining me tonight.
You bet.